Hello, hello. I'm David Lee Kim, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, we hear from Eric Su. Eric is the chairman of digital marketing agency Single Grain and CEO of Clickflow, an SEO experimentation tool. He also hosts two podcasts, Marketing School with Neil Patel and Leveling Up, an entrepreneurial podcast where he dissects growth levers that help businesses scale. He recently published a book called Leveling Up, Mastering the Game of Life. He's also my former boss. And we'll get into that a little bit in this conversation where we talk about his evolution from gaming to business, his thinking behind purchasing a failing agency, how he continues to learn and grow, and what it takes to get to the top. So without further ado, here's Eric Su. Hey Eric, welcome to the Long Game Podcast. I'm super excited for a conversation today. It's been a long time in the making.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. Happy to be here and happy to contribute.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people see you as the host of the Marketing School podcast with Neil Patel. You interview a bunch of big names for the Leveling Up podcast. You just released a book, Leveling Up, How to Master the Game of Life. They might see you as the guy who turned Single Grain from a failing agency to millions of revenue or founder of Clickflow. I know you're also coaching agency owners. There are many sides to you. And I mean, on my end, I see you as my old boss that laid me off after a few months. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But in those few months, you pushed me and my ambitions further than where they already were. And, maybe we'll talk about the firing later, but
we should talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot has happened in your life since we met back in 2015. And before I dig into that, I wanted to get into a theme that I think will be woven throughout our conversation. I just read your book, Leveling Up, and where you use video games as a metaphor for life, video games are based on life, so that makes sense, but there's your background there. And you talk a lot about the long game and thinking about the long term, right? And in gaming, you have to grind to level up to get to that level 99 or whatever you're trying to get to. And in business, it's clear you've been playing that long game. But, in a lot of media and Twitter and all of that, you see a lot of short-sightedness. And I'm curious, how and when did you end up developing that sort of long-term mindset and committing yourself to that?
I think so. Early in my career, learning marketing, when you start learning from the internet marketers, you see that there's a lot of short-sightedness. Look at my Lambo, look at my big house, look at this, look at that. And it's all me. And even SEO back in the day. So that was kind of my foundation first,
right? Were you
right?
going to those summits in Vegas and affiliate marketing and stuff?
I actually went to one of them before. You can definitely kind of feel that there was a difference, right? In terms of kind of mindset versus like the tech community. And also when I first started learning SEO, I tried all the short-term stuff, right? So I tried all the black hat stuff, the article spinning stuff, and I would test it on different projects on my own, and I would torch those projects, right? They would get a lot of traffic, and then the next day they would get burned, right? And so I think I started learning the long game. That started to get reinforced at that point, but even before that, I when I played a lot of poker, that taught me to also think about the long game too. So I think probably it was those two. I think the poker and SEO are probably the best lessons for kind of long-term thinking.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of learned trial by fire that short-term doesn't work in the long term.
And I've just found that what works best for me is whenever I tried something short-term, it just doesn't work out. But whenever I've stuck with something for the long term, it works out better. And then when you start to study kind of the patterns of the quote unquote most successful people in the world, whether they're investors or entrepreneurs, usually they just stick with something for a long time and they figure it out, and that's what it is.
Yeah. Who were those people at the time that you started looking to and you were developing that mindset? Like what made it click for you?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, so I probably started reading, people can call it self-help or self-development books, but started reading, Seth Godin books, and I would say that probably started happening at maybe age 23 or so. So I just started devouring everything, right? And then I actually had access to this one torrent site that allowed me to get these courses that were like, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 for free, right? And so I learned a lot that way. So, I mean, and then from there, it's just kind of reading biographies and learning from the most successful people, right? Because you get to learn from their mistakes for, $10 or $20. So it's one of the best deals out there.
Yeah. I think it was you that recommended The Billionaire Who Wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, I read that book when I was 25, and that was recommended by Rand Fishkin over Twitter. And that's a book that, made a big impact on me and kind of how I think about how I want to live the rest of my life.
Yeah. And getting back to gaming, I didn't realize you were so accomplished in gaming. You were in like the top guilds in World of Warcraft. Clearly you spent a lot of time grinding to join those ranks. I'd love to hear about that time. Like, what were you doing to get to the top? You're talking about like 8-hour raids. Like, what did you have to sacrifice in order to get to the top?
Well, I mean, I started playing WoW right when college started. So before that, there was a game called EverQuest. So maybe when I was about 12 years old or so. So I spent a lot of time playing that. That was kind of the precursor to WoW. And yeah, you would have to grind. And I think in the book, I talked about in one scenario where I was trying to get this it was called an epic weapon, where it clearly is almost a status symbol to clearly set me apart from other people. And you had to, sit for kind of weeks at a time waiting for this one monster to spawn. And then you had to get that item from that monster, right? And then you had to kind of move heaven and earth and gather 30 to 40 people together to help you with kind of, these, killing these monsters, right? So I guess I learned at age 12 how to grind that way. And then World of Warcraft, I mean, we were playing, we played till like 3 or 4 a.m. and then we wake up at like probably 9, 10 a.m. again, and then just wake up and eat really unhealthy food. But that taught me the value of being a part of the best teams and having to go the extra mile to get, to be able to do the most amazing things, and taught me the value of communication as well and camaraderie. So a lot of these things, I sacrificed school, right? I was subject to dismissal my first year going to college, and I was fired from, I think I was fired from one job because I played WoW, too late. I was raining, so I didn't want to go to work. So that's what it was. That was when I was like 21 years old. So,
and I think a recurring theme in the book that I was shocked to hear about, like you kind of said a couple of times, like you were sort of seen as a loser, a disappointment to your parents, like almost dropping out of school and all of that. It seems like that single-mindedness and becoming the best, like those were the sort of side effects of that.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, it's something I work on with my coach, right? And what you find out is that, and I've had a lot of different coaches before. So when people like they're rolling their eyes, like I don't need a coach for accountability because I'm pretty accountable. But what my coach helps me with is basically uncovering my entire past, right? And he runs a company called Reboot. His name's Jerry Colonna, and so like I didn't realize how important this was because almost everything I do is related to my childhood, how I behave right now. And I think that's probably the case for most people. They just haven't unwinded that, their programming, their DNA. And so, yeah, I mean, I've learned to kind of reframe at an early age, if people are hating on me or people are kind of underestimating me, to use it as fuel, right? So I actually quite enjoy it now when I hear people say things about me, right? Like, I think it's great. So when people say it, I'm like, it's great, right? And when people tell me like, other people are like, oh, this person is talking crap, whatever, I'm like, that's great, right? So like to kind of use that as a mental model, to use it as a tool in your tool belt, I think is really powerful. Whereas other people would just kind of, get sad about it, right? So just depends on how you look at things. Yeah,
it's interesting you bring that up. I remember when I started learning that myself, people were like, "Oh, fuck the haters." I'm like, actually, the haters are helpful. Like, I want to prove them wrong because that's the best thing you can do. Like, when you're successful and they're not, you don't have to say anything back to them.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen The Last Dance with Michael Jordan?
Oh yeah.
So I mean, there's every couple of weeks or so, I'll go like there's this it's like 10-minute segment. You can just go to YouTube and just type in Michael Jordan Last Dance. That's all I needed, right? And there's so many scenarios where like George Karl will walk by him and like not talk to him. It's like, and that's all I needed, right? Yeah. And so like that, it's funny to me because it's the motivation, right? And like, yeah, a lot of times it's just like, oh, that's all I needed.
It felt like a biography of your life.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it was you that introduced the book Reboot to me that I read, and I'll admit I cried through a lot of it. It was a lot of work, and I now recommend it to a lot of folks. It's interesting using work as a medium for self-exploration and discovery, and it sounds like that was the sort of work you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's continual work, right? It never really ends. And by the way, what I'll say too is, working, it probably took me 12 or 13 sessions with Jerry there's this one, the 13th session, I was looking at my notes and I was like, wow, there's a recurring theme that keeps popping up from my childhood, right? And it has to do with my mom. It's over and over and over. And then we started to dive into that, and then we uncovered a lot, right? And so sometimes it's taking a step back to kind of maximize, your learnings.
Yeah. And so, all right. So how did Eric Sue, this guy who was bad at school, nearly got dismissed, how did you end up finding yourself in 2014 buying a failing agency? Like, what were the events that led to that moment?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, when I came out of college and I got that dead-end job, so I was getting paid, $32,000 a year, and living at home, I was doing data entry, and I was like, oh, this is it. And in the book, I think I mentioned this too. So I came out of a pretty good public school, and I was doing data entry, and I looked over, and I was maybe 22 or 23 years old, and there's a guy that was 30 years old, and he went to Harvard. And one of my coworkers, who was my friends, would make fun of him all the time, right? I'm just like, man, what if I become like him? And so I think at that moment,
he was doing the same job as you,
same exact job as me. Went to Harvard, and then my kind of work, my colleague would make fun of him all the time. So, look at you went to Harvard, you're 30 years old. It was actually kind of sad.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, I can't let that happen to me. So, from there, that's when all the self-help, the self-development stuff started. And, my friend who now works at Airbnb told me about digital marketing, and then picked up an internship, changed 5 jobs the first year. And then basically within 2 years, I was leading marketing at an online education startup. And then 8 months after that, I got a chance to come in as a number 2 for the agency that I have right now called Single Grain. And then eventually, maybe 6 months after that, I had the chance to buy out everyone, and I took over the entire company. And that sounds amazing and all that, but don't worry, I completely failed. I was actually telling my team today, because we're working through an integration right now, because we just bought another agency. And I was like, hey guys, cool. Here's all the things that went wrong, and just go the opposite direction. Just invert this. And so we had the playbook on how to not do it. So.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask about that. Like, you said you had the opportunity to buy this agency, and what I understand is it came with a lot of debt, both financial and maybe debt in terms of systems and culture. Why buy that agency versus starting from scratch?
It was probably a mental block, because also one side of me, looking at a personality test, we actually had a bunch of people take the Ray Dalio test, which I think is great. When you look at how detail oriented I am, it's actually fairly low. And so to have to go through the paperwork of starting a new company, all these things, I'm just lazy, right? And I know Andrew Wilkinson has this blog post about lazy leadership. I probably took it a little too extreme there, but I just didn't feel like doing it. So I was like, oh, the work's all done here, and there's people, so I think this is going to be easier. In hindsight, to your point, I should have just started an agency and started from scratch, right? Because I can tell you it was a complete disaster when I took it over. And the opportunity to buy the agency, even Neil at the time told me, look, there's no brand equity, there's nothing here, you should leave, right? But it was my idea to buy the company. And look, even today, do I regret it? No. But would I do it again? No.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like, so the assumption I made here, maybe it was incorrect, that you saw us failing, you knew it was going to be a long haul, you were thinking long term about how you'd turn around. It sounds like it was kind of just you being lazy at the end of the day.
It was me being lazy, and me seeing asymmetric upside with, hey, look, if it works out, then I can totally take the cash flows and reinvest it in other kind of more exponential revenue sources. Because I've always, coming from the agency world, I don't think it's the best business model. And so, I came from SaaS, right, in tech. So I thought my poo-poo didn't stink. And, thankfully we're able to make that happen. But also the downside case was, look, if it doesn't work, I end up not owing any debt at all. I lose $2 out of pocket, but it's an MBA, So
Yeah. All right. So you came into Single Grain, you purchased it. What was the scenario? Like, what was the situation, and how did you prioritize what you needed, what fires you needed to put out?
yeah, I mean, look, we were an SEO agency at the time, and the work we were doing was no longer valid because of the Penguin and the Panda update. So these were algorithm updates that fundamentally shifted how people get results from SEO, right? And the way Single Grain was doing work was not exactly, I'll say it wasn't exactly the best quality back then, right? And so, I came in, I was like, okay, I'm tasked with basically flying the plane that's going down while trying to rebuild it, right? And everything was wrong. Like our services were no longer valid, which meant a lot of our people were no longer valid. And there's probably no reason to keep the SF office, but I went about it all the wrong way, right?
There was an SF office? I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah, we were right next to this company called Runkeeper, or like something like that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we're in Soma. And I shut it because I came from a remote background. So I was like, let's go remote, guys. I made all these sweeping changes. I laid off a couple people. I didn't build rapport with anybody. And then from there, I mean, it just, it got from bad to worse. I read this book called Let My People Go Surfing, which I think I told you about. And I took it literally. I stopped showing up to the office because it's like people don't want to be micromanaged, right? So I'm like, okay. And so we dropped all the way down to one employee a year after I took it over. So
who was that one employee?
Matt Prater.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
And then I remember I think somewhere around that time is probably where I entered the picture. Yeah. I sent like an email to you like, hey, I was early on in my career, said, hey, really like your profile, what you're doing, would love to learn from you, get coffee. Mm-hmm. And do you remember that story? Like what was it like,
yeah,
like on your side of the table?
I just remember we went to Starbucks. And then I knew immediately. Usually you can see, like we have some people on our team right now. You can catch immediately when someone's got it, and so I was like, okay, we got to get this guy right. The thing is, we couldn't really afford another person at the time, right? So then we hired you, but at the end of the day, it's like things weren't that good, right? So that's what happened.
So you knew
yep.
hiring me that you probably couldn't afford it.
Yeah, but it was a risk that I was willing to take because you have to take risks in business, right? But unfortunately, like it was risking your kind of livelihood as well. But hopefully it wasn't too bad. So
I mean, it ended up working out. I remember we were in San Francisco a couple of years ago at I think it was Growth Marketing Conference. Yep. We caught up for coffee. I don't know if you remember that interaction.
I remember that.
Like you pulled me aside. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I basically with David, I said, hey, I want to clear the air on this. Like it was my screw up, right? Because the way I messaged it, because I was too proud and I was too shameful or too ashamed to kind of admit what was going on. And so I was telling Dave like, hey, look, we're gonna have to let you go because of this. And the reality was it's really because the company wasn't doing that well. And I mean, come on, my outside accounting firm called me and said it might be time to shut it down, right? And so I told Dave, look, it was my fault at the end of the day. I own up to it. And look, I'm happy that you're doing really well right now. And it did work out for him because he ended up going to HubSpot and then, he ended up working for a lot of really cool tech startups. So.
Yeah, I remember, I mean, this is like getting a little bit personal between us, but I remember that conversation. I was like, wow, it seems like Eric was holding on to that for a little bit. I mean, I was too. Yeah. I never completely understood why I got let go, but a cool thing was, over that time, I got to see Single Grain succeed and continue to grow. And like, we were both speaking at Growth Marketing Conference. That was really like a really interesting milestone. And, after, I think it was 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, we kind of cleared that air and it was like, hey, yeah, like it all worked out. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that exposure to you and how you were thinking and growing a company was enough to fuel my ambitions, right? Like you became that person to chase. And I remember we were sitting in the downtown Single Grain office in LA, mm-hmm. and you were telling me about this mission of educating 1 billion people about marketing, right? I wanted to get to that because the way you talk about mission influenced me a lot. But the other piece, I'm curious, folks always talk about mission. How did you land on that mission? Like you were talking about not being the best student and all of that. So how did you land on like education as a mission?
Yeah, I think it changes. So to answer your question around education, so everything I've learned around kind of business and even people dynamics, running a company, all came after college, and that was all self-taught. That was all kind of self-education, right? I wasn't taught this in college. In fact, I barely went to class in college. So that's why it's important to me, because I feel like sure, friends and family might have looked down on me growing up, but then eventually, like I self-educated, and the whole thing here is, if I feel like if I can make something happen, I feel like anybody can make it happen, right? And so I want people to become the best versions of themselves, and it's gotten even broader than that now. Instead of saying, "Hey, I feel like everyone just says a billion people now. This was a couple of years ago now. Like everyone, reads like a mission book, and that's what it is. And maybe 2 years ago, this was pre-COVID. Neil and I have an event, and we had the founder of Activision speak, and his mission is to help entrepreneurs achieve their dreams. And at the moment, I was like, that's not specific. People talk about specific goals. They talk about, SMART goals and all that. And it was what he said right afterwards that really resonated with me. He's like, that's what a mission is. It's not supposed to be achievable. It's something you can wake up to and get a little closer to every day. And so my mission now, just personally, is to level up the world, right? And that's much broader now. But now I'm like, okay, I can just be excited every day and just get a little closer to it. And each company can have a different mission, but I can have my overarching mission. And so for me right now, just looking at, if leveling up is the mothership, how do we take people not from just zero to job ready, but how do we make them into a leader and help them transition into becoming an entrepreneur or doing their own thing?
Yeah, and I guess in that vein of leveling up and thinking about this mission, I mean, you went from this story of struggling in school and kind of being a disappointment in all this. I imagine like there was this evolution, and I think there's an additional layer that I don't think we've spoken about before, but like being an Asian American while doing all this and having Asian parents who may have some desires for us to become a doctor or lawyer or go to business school and all of that. What was that relationship like? Like, how did you kind of put them off while you're figuring out all this stuff?
So, I mean, they're always going to say what they want to say, right? So we're talking about Asian parents right now, or really any parents for that matter. But, when I first took over Single Grain, it was like, are you ready for it? Shouldn't you get an MBA? Or when I first started writing my book, who are you to write a book, right? So you hear a lot of this stuff, and that's where give me more, right? It's great. So I think you just kind of learn to internalize that or use it as fuel, and that's fine. I think it's really just not even just Asians, but anybody else. I think I think it's tough what's happening to Asians right now. I mean, more hate crimes and all that, but at the same time, the best thing you can do if you are Asian listening, or really just any race at all, is just worry about what you can control, and then from there you can affect change, right? If you can become the best version of yourself, you're going to have a lot more resources at your disposal, and I think that's the best way to go about things.
Yeah. So how would you describe the game you're playing now? Like, your mission is to level up the world. Like, how do you describe what that game is and what your levers are in that game?
Yeah, I mean, it's, people ask me, like, why write a book called Leveling Up? And, I tell them the easy answer would be to write a book about marketing, and then it's just tied into the funnel, and then you can have all these other things, and great. But leveling up is something, it's my philosophy. It's what I'm going to work on, the rest of my life. Right. And so the way I see it is, we have a holding company, right? So the agency is one piece of it. We have a SaaS. We're actually working on buying another SaaS company right now. And then there's, other kind of acquisitions we're working on. And so I just think that's a way to have fun. You look at what Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have done. They have a holding company, and they just have fun. Like, even at ages, they're 90 plus now, they're just having a blast, learning, interacting with people. And that's what it is. And then in the meantime, you can, in your wake, you can affect a lot of change. So I think that's interesting. What I'm not interested in is, people talking like the private equity model would be buying a business and flipping, right? Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that model. It's just, it's not for me. Like, I'm much better at just buying something, holding it, and growing it. And that's very much what leveling up is about, right? It's buying something, holding it, and then just continuing to get better and better over time.
So it's interesting hearing that you're buying another company. You just purchased an agency on top of the two podcasts, the two businesses already, the book. You're active on Clubhouse. I feel like every time I see your Instagram, you're posting about another Clubhouse event. You're doing some stuff with NFTs.
I'm very inactive on Clubhouse now. So
now?
Yeah, I mean, previously I was spending like 40 hours a week on it. Now, like I was just supporting my friend yesterday and that was it. So
yeah. So what's your framework for deciding what to focus on right now?
Yep. So for me, I mean, it's high leverage activities, right? So it could be doing deals. So it could be buying something, and recruiting is very high leverage as well. So I do know that if I'm reaching out to someone, so there's someone I've been trying to recruit for the last 3.5 years who's a superstar. Finally, I think we're going to be able to get him. But I've had to nurture that relationship over the years. So I've done that with a lot of our great people. And also creating content is high leverage as well. So doing this, chopping this stuff up, and then having a great team to, focus on the brand. We're getting better and better at that over the years, and we'll continue to get better at that. And financing, right? So that's keeping cash in the bank or raising money. It's really those four things where I can have the highest kind of impact. Like, sure, I can do everything. I can jump in. If someone needs me to kind of, I don't know, screen someone, I can do it, right? But that's not the best use of my time. So,
yeah, and all those things you said that were self-taught and running a business, figuring out the finances and recruiting, all of that. Mm-hmm. How did you go about teaching yourself those things? Like, I know there are books, but there are a lot of things where you kind of just do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reading to do, so you can, and all the reading in the world is not going to help you. Sometimes, like, you just have to go out there and make the mistakes. The other thing would be learning from other people's mistakes in peer groups. So, I'm in YPO. That's a great peer group. I was an EO for about 7 years or so. I learned a lot of stuff that, I didn't know that I didn't know. And, back then people would show me stuff like, oh, you got to do this cash flow forecast document. You got to do this. You got to worry about this. I didn't know these things because I was 26 or 27 at the time when I took over Single Grain. And these people were like in their mid 30s, 40s, 50s, and they just taught me a lot. And I think learning from the wisdom of others, or, throwing your own peer group, or going to conferences like the TED conferences, like I think these are all worthwhile endeavors. And yeah, it just makes you a better person. So like at the end of the day, is what you're doing going to make you a better business person and also just a better person in general?
Yeah. So I have a couple rapid fire questions for you to go through.
Yeah.
First one is, what video games are you playing now?
None. Well, last week we had a couple people in the office. Like I hadn't seen a lot of my team members for over 14 months. So we got a chunk of people together, and then one of the guys brought Smash Brothers. So I enjoy playing Smash Brothers with my team. Like back when we had the office, we'd play every day after work. But
who's your character?
So it's Lucina. And if I'm playing in a group environment, like where it's free for all, then I'll probably use like a Ganondorf or an Ike, where I have a big weapon and I can kill a lot at once. So
I thought you would have been like a Fox.
Oh no, Fox dies too easily. So yeah, Fox maybe one-on-one, but not like group setting. But anyway, I find that when I try to play games, I just keep thinking about. I think the ultimate game is business, so I just keep thinking about like, oh, what else can I do? What other levers can I pull? So I just can't do it now. Like, I was talking to one of our team members who talked about completing, Breath of the Wild, Zelda, and I was like, how long did you spend on it during the pandemic? He's like, 3 months. I was like, man, like I could have done that back in the day, but now 3 months on that, like I can't do it. So
yeah, I remember when I was growing up, I was more of like an RPG MMO type of guy, and I would spend hours just grinding and trying to do all the side quests and get like the whole storyline. Mm-hmm. And I recently picked up Chrono Trigger, if you ever played that.
Yep.
And first of all, the way I'm playing the game is so different from when I was a kid. Like less perfectionist, just getting through, which is a metaphor, I think, for life. And the other one is becoming more self-aware of the obsession I have. Like I played it on a plane next to my girlfriend, mm-hmm. and it was a 6-hour flight. She said, "You did not look up once. Like I've never seen you like that before." I'm like, that's what happens when I get obsessed with
your eyes
something.
Must have hurt.
It did. Yeah, they did. So who do you admire professionally and why, or who's that person you're chasing?
I mean, the cliche answers would be like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, right? But they have scandals going on. But it's I think it's, you look up to certain aspects of people, not every single thing, right? So maybe I might disagree with some people on some things, but I might look up to them in other ways, right? So, you might look up to the Warren Buffetts, the Jeff Bezos, the Elons of the world, just because their thinking is so long term and it's different from other people. So you want to zig where other people are zagging. So I think for me now, it's just kind of the focus is becoming the best version of myself or continuing to do that. And, there's only one of me, right? But I mean, look, if there's something that resonates with me that other people say, then sure, I'll be a fan. So
yeah. And for someone at your level, you have all these different things going on. My impression is you're learning really from other people who've already done that before you. Are there other channels that you're using to better yourself?
Yeah, I mean, like the ones I mentioned. So right now, YPO, and then I actually have a peer group of other kind of, these are entrepreneurs who are doing like 8 to 9 figures, and we get together, let's say 3 times a year. So we go on a trip together. Like it'll be somewhere that's remarkable, right? And then even beyond that, like, moving to Miami in a couple weeks or 2 weeks or so, getting people like I enjoy throwing dinner. So when I go to conferences, I'll throw the dinners because I'm an introvert and I'd rather just pay for everyone and I get to curate whoever I want. And then, if you're the connector, everyone will remember you and you just kind of continue to connect people, and it's free to connect people. So I find that, whatever it costs to pick up the bill, like it's easily worth it because it's interesting conversation that you've curated and it's a good experience that you created. And like even doing the events with Neil as well. So I think at the end of the day, it's just talking to people that are doing interesting things. And I find that Twitter is also great for that too. People are very responsive on Twitter. So yeah. Yeah,
I think our group of founders are going to steal that idea of hosting the dinners and doing retreats. I may ask you if you have any playbooks for hosting a retreat like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell everyone on the podcast now. I have a friend that does. So there's another group I'm in actually called Mastermind Talks. If you just type in Mastermind Talks, just type in PDF, and I'm sure you'll find some PDFs in there that are his playbooks. So awesome.
And if you could have dinner with one person dead, one person alive, who would they be?
Alive, probably would be Jeff Bezos. I just want to know how he thinks about things. Dead, probably Rockefeller, because he actually, I mean, the way he ran his family, like even after he passed away, the way his family stayed together, he had a pretty good process for it. And what happens with most rich families is that they kind of fall apart, and there's a lot of selfishness going on. But there's actually a book called Becoming a Rockefeller. By Eileen Rockefeller, and it talks about her growing up and how she had to live, being seen as a really rich person. So
interesting. Haven't heard that one before. Gonna have to look that up. And for you, who's creating a lot of content, what sort of blogs, podcasts, Substacks, or people do you like to follow right now?
Yeah, so Patty McCormick from Not Boring. I think there's also this guy named Mario. He has Substack. It's not a Substack anymore. It's called The Generalist. Yep. And then I like what Anthony Pompliano's doing, and I do like Axios, and I do like what I do enjoy reading The Morning Brew too. So yeah.
And what's something you recently purchased that you find yourself recommending often?
Probably something that some type of anchor, right? So I have this turtle next to me that reminds me to slow down. So I mean, I got this from Puerto Rico, but it's just, you look at it, I mean, it's in front of you. So it's a constant reminder to slow down, whether it's slow down my writing, slow down how fast I talk, slow down in general.
Why slow down?
Uncovered this with Jerry, because we actually looked at all the employee engagement tools that we had, and we would constantly see over time that people would find it hard to keep up with me, even though I felt like I wasn't moving quickly enough. They felt like it was hard to keep up, right? And then I found that there's a reason my handwriting's ugly. It's because I write too fast. There's a reason why it seems like things are frantic, because I talk really fast too. So just trying to be conscious of that. Like I'm talking fairly quickly on this podcast, but if you listen to the podcast I did with the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, you can see I've slowed down quite a bit there. And even my friend listened, it's like, oh, you actually sound wise there. So yeah.
Slow down and you sound wise.
Yeah.
So it's not really necessarily for you. It's more for like being conscious of the team and how that impacts others around you?
Well, it's that, but that's also for myself too, because there's no reason to kind of, what's the rush, right? That's what it like. I think it's being patient with the results long term, but just keeping the pace up, staying consistent, and eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, that's been a constant reminder for me as well of be impatient with taking action, but don't expect results immediately. Like there's no way that moving any faster is going to get you there.
You get that from the recent My First Million podcast?
I don't really listen to that podcast. I've listened to a couple of episodes, but not the most recent one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was like, oh, but you're not with HubSpot anymore. But yeah, because HubSpot bought them, right? So
yeah. And so where can listeners find you on the internet?
Yeah, they can go to levelingup.com, or they can just hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. It's at Eric OSIU.
I got to ask 2 questions there. What was the process to buy that domain? I kept checking it to see when it would finally flip and become yours. But yeah. I imagine it's probably expensive and a process to get it.
It cost me $4,000. It wasn't that bad. So I had a broker reach out, and then so the best move is you have a broker reach out on your behalf, because if it's you reaching out, then they know how to jack up the price because they know they have leverage there. So better to have a broker do it.
Got it. Tips. And Erico, I realized in the book that was your gaming name. Is that still the case? Is that why you use Erico? Yeah,
it's just Erico Sue because Eric Sue's taken, right? So it's just you add that part in, it's easier. So
it's a SEO challenge for you there.
Yeah.
All right. And is there any last words you'd like to say to listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, well, by the way, it's not an SEO challenge because there's only one other Eric Sue that ranks highly. But I have like 5 of the top results in Google, I think, and he's like this artist from Hong Kong. But I think it's kind of what you were just saying, right? It's long-term kind of patient and short-term impatient with whatever you're doing, right? Just keeping things moving. So,
right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Eric, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for the time and conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.